Hello and welcome back to I Made This. My name is Ollie and today I got a package. If you've read the description of this video or seen the thumbnail, you know exactly what's in this box. It's the Toxic Crusaders Apocalypse Attackcopter. These things are like gold dust, they're so hard to get hold of. However, after finishing my hideous hovercraft restoration, a guy all the way over in Australia called Paul Travers hit me up on Facebook and he said, "How would you like the body for the Apocalypse Attackcopter? It has little to no accessories but it's ripe for restoration." And I said, "Absolutely mate, I would love that. How much do you want for it?" And he said, "Nothing. As long as you pay for postage and packaging, it's all yours." So a couple of weeks later, this arrived on my doorstep and it's absolutely amazing. So yeah, full disclosure, I've had this in my possession for over a year now and it's taken me that long to get round to starting work on the restoration, what with work and one thing or another getting in the way. However, having all that time, I've kind of workshopped and troubleshot everything I need to do on this build, so hopefully it should be pretty smooth sailing, he says. Right, let's see what I need to make. So, as you can see, the Attackcopter is pretty bare bones. It's got some broken parts as well that need fixing, and it definitely needs some new stickers. So first of all I need to make two different connectors, one is larger than the other and they're basically there to hold up the dumping drums and toxic waste exhausts and the pollution payload bombs in place. And then we spin over to the other side and I again have to make some more connectors, exactly the same as the other side, that again the dumping drums and toxic waste exhaust and pollution payload bombs can attach onto. And then I need to make these flexible toxic tubes that attach to the dumping drums and the gas mask. And again, I need to make the same on the other side. This pollution pumping smog phaser has seen better days, and as you can see, several of the parts have either been snapped or chewed off over the years. There is also an electrical element to this toy, and once the trigger is pulled, some smoke should come out of these smoky smog pipes. And then finally, I need to make some spinning radioactive rotting rotor blades. And thankfully I've got several friends who've got an Attackcopter, my good friend Theo over at Slimehouse TV and Ryan the Collector Kid, and they were kind enough to send me images of the accessories and stickers to aid me with the restoration. So yeah, I think it goes without saying, there is a lot to do on this Toxic Crusaders Attackcopter. So without further ado, let's get to it. So first of all I'm going to make the toxic tubes, and then originally I was going to use these kids toys, you know, the kind that you can stretch out and they make irritating noises, especially when you spin them over your head. But ultimately they were too thick and they just weren't going to look right. So I was looking for other options and I found these tubes on eBay and they were the perfect size and they fit perfectly into the gas mask cockpit here. And there's Theo over at Slimehouse with his Attackcopter, and he was kind enough to get some measurements of his toxic tubes for me. So using Theo's measurements I cut the smaller tubes down to size. And then I placed masking tape over the bigger tube and marked out each individual ridge, because the way that I'm planning on doing this is that the larger one will overlap onto the smaller tube, thus creating that kind of ridged effect. You'll see what I mean in a minute. Now, it wasn't actually hard to make this, but it was quite time consuming sliding all these smaller pieces of tubing onto the tubing and kind of making sure that they were evenly spaced out. And because I feel like my tubing is going to be a bit more rigid than the actual toy version, I put some wire inside of it to help give it some shape. Yeah, and I think it's looking pretty good so far. And now we're on to the pollution payload bombs, and again Theo was kind enough to take some pictures and measurements for me of his, and he actually showed me that they come apart. I'm not going to do that on mine, I'm just going to make one solid because that's just another hassle. I drew out a picture to size of the bomb itself, and I just started to sculpt it together using Sculpey. I did it in separate halves and then joined it together. And yeah, we all know what it looks like, so you don't have to be children about it. Get over it. I start to sand it down just to make sure it's nice and even and nice and smooth. Just to make sure it's nice and symmetrical and everything fits together nicely. And then I glue it together. And now I'm starting to add on the kind of toxic slime-like detail that adorns pretty much every single Toxic Crusaders vehicle and accessory. And I just start to build out to make it look a bit more 3D and a bit more raised. Mine probably is a little bit more raised than the actual real one, but it's hard to be subtle with these things sometimes. And again, adding more slime, more toxic waste. And here I am adding the eyes. For some reason, the bombs on the Toxic Crusaders villains vehicles have eyes. Are they kind of like sentient? Are they like living bombs? Are they like kamikaze bombs? It's a bit of a sad existence for these bombs, isn't it? But yeah, anyway, here I am just making some of the extra detail that I'll be gluing onto the bombs eventually. Or right now, as it seems. And the one thing you got to be careful of is not to stick your fingers together like I do right here. There we go. A little bit more sanding down. So now I'm making the nozzle of the bombs, and I'm just drilling some holes and cutting some wood together. And if you've ever watched my channel before, you know I love to use the centre of a dog poo bag roll for whatever reason. I just think they're really handy, and it just finishes off the nozzle of this bomb nicely. And then using some milliput, which is a 2-part epoxy, I just start to fill out some of the detail and some of the gaps within the bomb itself. And here we are, here's the 2 finished bombs. Right, now it's time to make the dumping drums. So, over the years of making music videos and crafting, I've acquired various different types of barrels, be it to house slime or sweets or what have you. And I'm just looking to see which one would work best on the side of the Attackcopter. And I think this one for me is going to work the best. It may be a little bit too big, but I think it'll work fine. And the reason why I wanted to use one of these particularly is because it's already got the ridges on that I can just build upon. If I was to do it freehand, they would just end up being all skew-whiff. And I also need to create a little nozzle so that the toxic tubes can slot inside of it. And now I'm just preparing it by just removing some of the detail that I don't need anymore. And cutting some holes so that the tube can fit inside of it. And there we go, perfect fit. Now I'm just bulking out the ridges of the barrel itself just to make it even more cartoony and Toxic Crusadery. And again, this is just with milliput, which again is a 2-part epoxy, and when you mix it together, just leave it for a couple of minutes before you start working with it. But then you've probably only got really about half an hour work time. And again, using my favourite poo roll to help aid with the centre of the toxic tube. And again, I can't stress how perfect these dog poo rolls are. They're actually perfect, and it was the perfect fit for my toxic tubes as well. It was like it was meant to be. And now I'm just sanding it down just to make it nice and smooth and even. Now just gluing on that connecting piece there. And now I'm just smoothing it out onto the barrel a bit more with some more epoxy. And then with these little sticky dots, I'm adding some extra detail. I probably could have done this a little bit better, a little bit more symmetrical, but oh well, it is what it is. And the actual barrel itself has like a little area where a sticker goes, so I'm just making that now, and then I'll cut it to size. Now I'm actually only making one barrel, and that's because I'm actually going to mould this in silicone and then cast it in resin. And again, like the bombs, there's lots of slime and toxic waste detail on these things, so yeah, that's what I'm doing, just adding a load of that. And again, this sludge is not one-to-one with the real Attackcopter, but it's kind of like my own interpretation of it. And now it's time for the toxic waste exhausts. So I've rolled out 11 little balls, which I then shape into this kind of cone-like shape. And then I start to attach them all together in this circular formation. This was actually trickier than it looks actually, because you don't want to push them together too hard, because otherwise you'll lose the shape of the cone. There you go, that's kind of what I'm going for, but it needs to be a bit more flush to the actual barrel itself. There you go, a little bit more like that. Then using a pen lid, I just start to add some of the detail of the actual exhausts. And then now this is actually baked, and I'm just chipping away to kind of create some more of the detail, because it was so delicate to handle with that if I kind of tried to sculpt in too much detail when it was unbaked, it would have just fallen apart. And now I'm just using some Milliput to smooth away the chipped areas and to make some of the detail a little bit less pronounced, a little bit more subtle. And now all Playmates, Toxic Crusaders or Ninja Turtles vehicles had lots of strange details on it, so like plasters and weird shapes basically. I'm going by these photos that Theo and Ryan sent me, so I'm just kind of guessing as to what they are. To me they just like plasters and like little explosion shapes and things like that. So that's what I'm sculpting onto these exhausts. And there we go. Now it's all baked, I'm just giving it a nice little sand down, ready for priming a bit later on. And there we go, that's what it should look like when it's all attached. So now it's time to make the spinning radioactive rotting rotors. Now Paul, I believe, has several Toxic Crusaders Attackcopters, and he was kind enough to draw around the propeller blades of one of his, so that when it came to me making mine, I could make them, you know, near perfect. And watching Toy Pooloy a lot over the years, I've noticed he uses styrene a lot, which is a medium I've never used before. And I thought it'd be fun to try that out on these rotor blades, and it actually worked an absolute charm. I think this one I use is about 2mm thick. I did buy a 3mm thick, but just felt like that was overkill. Now, using this barrel itself, I was able to cut off this area here to kind of help make an attachment for the blade itself. It's hard to describe, so hopefully visually it will kind of make sense. Because I'll kind of want it to be able to slot in place, so it kind of has a nice kind of professional feel to it, if that makes sense. As you can see, it actually hugs over the blade attachment. Carefully glue it in place. It's probably not as central as it probably should be, but you know me. And then using this test tube kind of thing, I cut a little segment off it and then cut out this like little divot area, and then that again will lock into the center of the blade attachment area, so it gives it even more of a hold. And I believe that's what the original one is like as well. So as you can see here, it fits nice and snug, and that is not coming off at all. And now I just have to do some detail that adorns the top of the rotor blades. And I'm going to do that by using the top of this deodorant ball, cutting it in half, sanding it down so that it has a bit of a key when you're gluing it down. And then using the top of this pen lid, I'm going to place that on top of the ball to kind of create like a little spire thing. And there we go. However, I think it's a little bit too big, so I made another version. Again, using the lid of a roll-on deodorant and just this little part that I found in my bit box, and it looks a lot better. Now it's time to make the connectors so I can attach the drum barrels and the bombs onto the side of the Attackcopter. And I'm going to do that by using chopsticks of all things. I love using chopsticks. I tend to use them as drumsticks for my stop motion characters. But as you can see, once they're cut down, they fit really nice and snug. And I think it's going to work really well. Now I have to cut some corresponding holes into my bombs and just carefully scratch away at the dried Sculpey. I'm just gluing the chopsticks together so they don't fall apart. And there we go, look at that, a lovely fit. That's going to work really well. And then just testing it on the other side. Ah, yeah. And now I'm just adding a little bit of milliput to the ends of the chopsticks just to kind of make it a little bit thicker, just for an even snugger fit. And now it's time to make the connector for the barrel. And again, I'm going to cut a corresponding hole into the barrel. This is a lot more difficult than I actually thought it was going to be. And again, just cutting down the chopsticks so they fit perfectly. Now I have an issue because I'm casting this barrel. It's actually hollow, so casting it is going to be an absolute nightmare. So I've actually got to make it solid, and I'm just going to spend I don't know how long just shoving in plasticine inside of this barrel so it makes it solid, and then just making sure that there's enough space to fit the connector inside of it, and so that I can slide the toxic tubes inside as well. I hope that makes sense. Hopefully you can see what I'm doing, because I don't think I'm doing a very good job of explaining what I'm doing. And again, just adding a bit more milliput to each end of the connector just to make sure that the fit is as snug as it can be. And here we are. Here's every single accessory I've made so far, from the barrels to the toxic tubes to the bombs to the connectors, the spinning blades and the exhaust. And now I'm just priming it. Just priming it helps with the molding process, I find, because It just shows any imperfections that you need to kind of address before you get to the moulding stage, and it gives it just a nice coating so that when you mould it, it kind of comes out as a nice texture. So say if you gloss something and you mould it, it will come out with a shiny texture. If you spray something with a matte, it will come out with a matte texture. And now it's time to fix up the pollution pumping smog phaser. And looking at this, I think the best course of action is to drill a hole at the tops and the bottoms there and at the front there, and actually use a paper clip. Now I'm just cutting the paper clip to size and then gluing it in place, and then using baking powder, it sets nice and hard, and I can actually sand it down and kind of make it look a little bit more, I don't know, like it's been injected moulded or plastic moulding. It's got a bit of a lip to it and it's not just too straight down. And then to make the actual phaser of the gun, I'm using the end of a paint marker pen, which I will then cover in Milliput and then start to carve in the detail. And again, this probably isn't perfect, but it looks pretty good. And then once it's dried, after 24 hours, I sand it down, I glue it onto the body of the gun, and then add some extra detail, and then paint it. This is almost a perfect match. It probably needs to be a little bit more neon, so I might go over that again at a later date, but this will do for now. Now it's time to mould the accessories I've made, and then I do that by using old Lego pieces to make a box. I actually used to use foam board, but it just seems like such a wasteful endeavour because once you've made the mould, you chuck away the foam board because it's useless. Whereas with Lego, you can, reuse it, and making these things is such a wasteful endeavour anyway. Then I carefully place the accessory into the box and surround it by plasticine. And as you can see, I'm covering up half of the accessory in plasticine. And that's because I'm making a two-part mould, and now I'm building the wall up around the accessory because silicone is going to be poured into this part of the mould. But before that, I have to create some registration marks so that once I place the moulds together, they will fit nicely together. And the way I do that is I use beads because it will create a negative, and then when I then take out the plasticine and fill in the silicone on the other side, it will fill in that hole and create a connection point. You'll see what I mean in a minute, it'll make sense. So here are all my accessories ready for the first part of the moulding process. And yeah, I think they're going to work out pretty well. So this is the silicone that I use. It's from MB Fiberglass. It's the 5.5 kilogram kit. And it used to be a lot cheaper than it was. The prices of these things have drastically rocketed over the last couple of years. That's the catalyst, by the way. And basically it's a 10-to-1 ratio. So say if you put 100 grams of silicone into that cup, you will then place 10 grams of the catalyst in it, and then carefully mix it all together until it's a nice consistency. However, when you start mixing in the catalyst with the silicone, you're introducing air into it, and you need to get rid of that air. Now, I've had a vacuum chamber for several years and I've never actually used it, so it's now the time to level up my skills and, start to use this equipment that I've got. So during this process, the actual silicone starts to rise and it almost doubles in volume, but I think once it hits 27, that's when it drops. And that's what I think when you want to lock it off, leave it for a good, minute to 90 seconds, and then slowly let out the air via the other gauge. I think that's correct, and it seemed to work for me. If I'm doing it wrong, please let me know in the comments below. But yeah, essentially what this process is doing is just basically removing all that air that you've put into it while mixing it together. And I think I've got the hang of it eventually. Oh fuck. Ghostbusted 2, that, look at that.
Whoops.
And as you can see, I'm just carefully pouring the silicone inside the molds, using some sticks now and again to prod into certain areas, and I tend to pour from the corners and let the silicone just kind of find its way around the accessory itself. Here I'm actually injecting the silicone inside that center point because I want it to get all in there, so that once I've made the connectors, they'll fit nicely into the finished resin barrel. So as you can see, 24 hours later, it's nice and hard, and then I start to demold it, and I do that by taking apart the Lego encasement. And then I carefully remove the plasticine. I don't actually want to remove the accessory from the silicone if I can help it. And then now I'm just using a bit of isopropyl alcohol to kind of remove any excess plasticine. Now, clay is probably better to use for this, but I don't know, it seems pretty expensive, and I have a lot of plasticine because that's what I do for a living, claymation, so I have plasticine everywhere. And now I'm just building up the Lego wall around the accessory again, ready for latex to be poured in to create the second part of the mould. And now I'm just gluing on some spouts onto the back of the exhaust so that I've got something to pour into. Then this is a wax release agent, and you just spray it inside the mould, and basically it creates a very thin layer of wax on the mould so that when you pour the silicone over the top of it, it doesn't attach to itself, because that's what silicone does, it attaches to itself, and you won't be able to get your item out again unless you cut it out. And again, just pouring that silicone in the corners, just letting itself find its way around the accessory. And then again, after another 24 hours, I then take it all apart again. And then carefully prise it apart. And then, as you can see, you have a perfect two-part mould. Yeah, I'm really happy with how that one's turned out. And again with the connectors. And now we're opening the barrel. So far so good. Oh yeah, look at that. That seems to have worked really well. I'm really happy with that. And now I'm opening up the exhaust. Oh no. I don't understand how this happened, because I used that same batch of silicone on another part of another mould and that dried perfectly. So why that part didn't dry, I don't know. So sadly, I'm going to have to redo that part of the mould. But it's not a total waste. I can still reuse that part that hasn't dried fully. I can chop it up eventually and reuse it in another mould down the line. But as you can see, I've cut in some air vents and a pouring hole into this mould as well. Right, now it's time for casting, and we're going to start off by doing the dumping barrels, and we're going to be using the part B of the Polycraft SG2000 PU casting resin, and into that we're going to pour in some blue and green pigments, and that's going to hopefully create the turquoise teal colour that the barrel should be. Carefully mix it together, and then we pour in the part A, because these resins are a part A, part B mixture, and it's a 50-50 mix. And then quickly mix it together, and then I pour it into the mould. And if you notice, I'm only pouring the resin into half of the mould, and that's because I feel if I was to fill up the whole mould with resin, it's just going to be far too heavy for the connectors. And not only that, the real versions would have been hollow anyway. So to hopefully achieve this, I'm going to rotate the mould in my hand very slowly back and forth on various different axes, to hopefully get that resin into all the nooks and crannies of the mould. And then hopefully, by the time we release it, we should have a fully formed barrel, but it's hollow inside. So any luck, that's what we should achieve. And so far it's looking pretty promising. A little bit of flashing, but that's not a problem. Let's have a look. Oh yeah, I am so happy with that. That has turned out pretty perfect. The colour wasn't that great, so I gave it another shot. Again, this is not perfect, so I end up painting it, but that's neither here nor there. Right, now it's time to do the bombs, and I use a mixture of different yellows and neon greens to make this putrid, bogey, vomit-looking green that the bomb should be. And I do a little bit of a pre-pour before putting the moulds together and then pouring in the rest of the resin. So fingers crossed this will have worked, and yes, it's worked a charm. Right, now we have to remold the second part of the exhaust, and also my connectors didn't turn out very well, so I've got to redo that. If you noticed here, the one end ended up being far too thick. It must have just shifted in the mould when I was doing the second part of the mould. So yeah, I've got to redo that, which is a pain in the bum, but oh well. And if you notice, I've done it as a one-piece mould as opposed to a two-part mould, purely for time. But basically you just cut it out. Don't cut it out straight though, do it a bit jagged so that when you place it back together it's got something to grip onto. Because if you do it straight, it has a tendency to misalign. Right, fingers crossed this exhaust comes out okay. Oh yeah, I'm very happy with that. That's turned out really nice. So this exhaust and connector should be a nice bright orange, but not like a full-on neon orange, so I do that by mixing just standard orange with neon orange. And also the resin itself dries white, so you've got to kind of take that into consideration as well. So I just want it to be a nice bright orange, but not too bright. So this is a two-part resin, A and B, and basically you have to put 50-50 of both in, and so say if you put 50 grams of one in, you put 50 of the other in, and then mix it together. You have to work fairly fast because this stuff starts to set pretty quickly, and you'll know when it starts to set because it starts to get pretty hot. And here I am just carefully pouring it into the moulds, just making sure it all gets in there. When I pour it in this one, as you can see, I kind of open up the mould a little bit just to kind of hopefully allow any air bubbles to escape. I do actually have a vacuum chamber, but I'm not going to lie, I'm pretty scared to use it, and I feel like it's going to be a bit of a learning curve, and I need someone to kind of show me the ropes with it really, if I'm perfectly honest. And I just felt like I didn't need to use it on this project, with the exception of this part here, which as you can see there is one little air bubble. But I do remake this part later on and I didn't get any air bubbles in it, so I'll take that as a win. But I solemnly promise the next time I do some moulding and casting I will use my vacuum chamber. And here I am just trimming off some excess flashing from this exhaust here, and look at that, I think it's going to look really awesome when it's all said and done. And let's see how these connectors turned out. Looking pretty good so far, if I do say so myself. And do they work? Oh yeah, look at that. That is awesome. Works an absolute charm. They fit in there really nice and snug. And let's see everything we've made so far, from the propellers to the barrels, the connectors, the exhausts and the toxic tubes. So now it's time to work on the electronics, and as I said earlier, this toy is able to produce smoke from the exhausts out the top once the trigger is pulled. But if you have a look at these battery connectors here, they're all corroded, so there is literally no way that these are going to work. So I thought it might be a fun opportunity to actually take it apart and see what we're working with. So it's really interesting to see how it all works with the trigger, the pumps and the cogs and everything. But what I really need to do is get inside that battery compartment and see if there's anything that's worth salvaging. Like I said, I really don't know what I'm doing when it comes to electronics and soldering, so I'm going to give my friend Nate, the Retro Tinker, a call.
So I'd just like to welcome Nate, the Retro Tinker, to I Made This. Nate has one of my favourite YouTube channels. Just tell us a little bit about the Retro Tinker and what you do.
Basically, I take old toys that are broken, I try to fix them, and I usually try to do something funny in each video if I can.
Yeah, your little adverts and skits are probably like the highlight of the video. Not to distract from what you make. That's fantastic, but you also put a lot of effort into those, and it's. But anyway, the reason why I've got Nate on here is because obviously, as you're watching this video, I'm trying to fix up the Toxic Crusaders Attackcopter, and I've got to a part where I'm going to do some soldering, and I literally have no idea what I'm doing. But Nate on his channel has done a little bit of it, so if you could talk me through a bit about soldering and how I can kind of fix up these kind of corroded connectors, I'd really appreciate it.
It's not too complicated. You're just melting a bit of metal on your contact, pulling the wire off. You clean it up as best you can, pull your contact out, soak it in some vinegar to get rid of all the old corrosion and such, and generally you pop it back in, you resolder your wire, and away you go.
Perfect. Yeah, so one thing I wanted to mention, obviously I've used some, you recommend I use some white wine vinegar to kind of clean up the contact. I will point out though, when I was trying to get this out of the actual toy, I yanked it that hard that I knocked over my bottle of white wine vinegar, and it went over my entire lovely new workspace and covered it, and now my office stinks with vinegar. But anyway, I managed to clean this up. So how do I get this to look? Will that work, or do I need to do anything else to it?
It'll most likely work. A little bit of if you give it a bit of a hit with a wire brush, or at least a little bit of sandpaper or something, just to shine it up, it should make good connection.
And then the other thing, some of the connectors from the opposite side, the actual little lips that are meant to go through the plastic, have broken. So will that matter, or?
Yeah, as long as you can get a bit of solder on it, it should be fine.
And the wire, does the wire need to touch that itself?
Yeah, basically, your wire needs to, as long as your wire is making contact with the copper. It should be fine. So yeah, anywhere that pokes through the plastic that you can solder your wire on, just so in there. Maybe put a drop of glue on it if you don't want it to move around or fall out.
So, because I'm a complete idiot, so copper, the solder cannot help conduct past the electricity, so it has to touch the copper. So the solder is literally there to hold it.
The solder itself will conduct electricity.
Oh, will, okay.
So don't worry too much. Yeah, so don't worry too much about trying to get your wire just directly on. Just
okay.
As long as you've got your solder melted, poke the wire in, remove your soldering iron, and just wait for it to solidify. That's all the connection you get. But do remember that if you smell bacon, you're holding the wrong end.
And on that note, I'm going to give it a go. Thanks, Nate.
No worries, mate.
So, because this restoration has taken me about 2 months on and off, during that time, I somehow lost the connectors that I got out of the battery compartment and cleaned up with the white wine vinegar. So, while I was on eBay, I was looking for battery connectors that could potentially work with this Attackcopter. And lo and behold, I found some. And with a little bit of bending, a little bit of clipping here and there, they actually seem to fit pretty well, to be honest. And I think this could be the way to go. And as you can see, the batteries fit in there like a charm. However, while I was also searching eBay, I searched for the Attackcopter, even though nothing ever comes up. But I found this body on there. So the actual mechanism doesn't work, but if you look at these connectors in the battery compartment, they're totally clean, so there's a good chance that those could still work. And if you notice here, the reason why it doesn't work is because one of the cogs is broken. But what I'm thinking is I could actually solder off this battery compartment and place it onto the body of the Attackcopter that Paul sent me. Does that make sense? If only Nate was here to kind of guide me through this, because this is going to be a nightmare.
Ollie.
Nate?
Hello there.
Where are you?
My broadband sucks, so I thought I'd contact you directly.
Okay.
Use the soldering iron. This is the solder you're looking for. I wouldn't do that. Now just hold the wire to the contact and apply heat. Now just make sure you don't leave in old batteries. Corrosion startles easily, but will soon be back, and in greater numbers. I better go. I've got someone on the other line wanting glue advice. You understand?
Okay.
Farewell, and may the flux be with you.
Oh, I'm running flux.
So using Nate's advice, I grab the soldering iron and take off the battery compartment from the body that I bought from eBay. And then I swap it over with the body of the Attackcopter that Paul gave me. Are you following? Does it make sense? And as you can see, I badly soldered these two together. I mean, it looks a bit messy, but it actually works and it holds, so, you know, I'm claiming that as a victory. Probably would have helped if I had some flux. Put it back together, put in some fresh brand new batteries and see if this sucker works. And it doesn't work. So, and look, even when it's pumped manually it doesn't work. So if my thought is, if I take the little black device out of the body I bought from eBay and replace it from the one from Paul's Attackcopter, maybe, just maybe, that might actually work. Let's see, I'm putting in the new, well I say new, but the other little device. I don't even know what this is and how it works, to be honest, so I'm just kind of blagging it. But yeah, it seems to solder on pretty well. Let's just hope it works. And look, we have smoke! Huzzah! The next thing to see is if it works with the tubing, and yeah, as you can see, smoke is coming out of it. And then the next test is to see what it's like with the exhaust on, and again, yep, you can see the smoke. So I never owned this toy as a kid, so I have no idea if that's the right amount of smoke, but for a toy that is over 35 years old, I'm taking that as a win. And now it's time to make the stickers. And thankfully, Paul had some photos of the original sticker sheets, which really helps me make my own stickers. So yeah, what I actually did was I drew everything up on paper with all the correct measurements and scanned it in, so it was a 1-to-1 scan, and then just redrew everything on Photoshop. And that's pretty much what I'm doing. It's nothing really exciting, I'm afraid. And unlike the hovercraft, which had, I don't know, countless amounts of stickers, this one is fairly light on stickers. I was quite happy about that, if I'm perfectly honest. And then it's time to print them out. Now, I don't know about you, but I always find printing out things pretty tricky because the colour that you see on the computer screen to eventually what comes out of your printer is never exactly 1-to-1. So you have to constantly fiddle around with your settings to make sure that, you know, they come out exactly as you hope they would. Like, for example, I think mine are a little bit too dark, but you know what? Seeing them all laid out here, I'm pretty happy with them. I think they look pretty good. And now it's time to put it all together. But before we do that, we need to give it a good clean, and I do that with a cloth and some isopropyl alcohol. And we need to get off some of those old stickers and the residue and just any marks that are just left on this toy. You know, this is a 35-plus-year-old toy and it just needs a little bit of TLC. And now it's time to apply the stickers, and this is really satisfying because this is where it all starts to come together, and the vision is starting to be realised, and it starts to feel like what it should be, the Apocalypse Attackcopter. And I'm really pleased with how these stickers that I've measured out myself actually fit into place perfectly. Look at that. Tremendous. Even though there are very few stickers on this, it starts to bring it to life and, you know, make it feel like a proper toy from the early 90s. However, I did keep this original nuclear sticker just because it looks a lot better than the one that I made. The colours are a lot more vibrant and a lot more fun. And now it's time to glue the exhaust onto the drum barrel. Oh, look at that. I'm so happy with how that's turned out. When I showed these to Theo, he did tell me there was one piece missing, and that was the screw in the back that held it together. And while mine is not functional, it just makes it look that little bit more authentic. And now let's snap everything together. So yeah, this is what we started off with. Pretty bare bones, but a good basis on which to start our restoration project. And then, as if by magic, 14 accessories later, here we are with a finished piece. I'm absolutely thrilled with how this looks. I'm so happy. And while it's not a one-to-one with the original, I'm sure my barrels are a little bit big, my exhausts are a little bit stumpy, my toxic tubes are probably a little bit more bold, and maybe my bombs are a little bit more detailed. But I'm absolutely thrilled with how this has turned out, and above all else, I hope Paul is thrilled with how this turned out. And I'm sorry it's taken me this long to finish it, but I really appreciate you sending this to me and letting me do it up for the channel. I had a lot of fun doing it. When I started this channel, I never thought of anybody sending me anything, so yeah, it means a lot to me that people are watching what I'm doing, and I really appreciate it. But a massive shout out to Nate for all the sage-like soldering advice. Also massive shout outs to Theo and Ryan for sending me all the photos and measurements and stuff like that, so I could make the accessories as accurate as I possibly could do. But yeah, I think that about wraps it up. If you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting the like button. I'd really appreciate it. Or, you know, if you're feeling really fancy, you could hit the subscribe button. That'd be awesome. You can reach out to me on social media. I'm on Facebook and Instagram. And until next time, take care and goodbye.